Analysis of ideological belief is another important component of political discourse, and this must be analyzed in order to look into some purposeful meanings or some deep meanings of political discourse, and that can also guarantee our analysis as purposeful. The analysis of ideological belief can be seen through representations a certain kind of discourse generates in our mental representations. Representation is one of the obvious functions of discourse, the kind of impression that generates into our minds. Since through language we usually present a certain view of reality, a given view of reality, and we do not cover all, or sometimes those views of reality we do not like. This is very much similar to ideational function of Halliday's, which looks into how we interact with the world surrounding us when we communicate. So, what kind of world we choose for ourselves is relevant here. When politicians use language, they try to imbue their view of society with an objective view by relying on evidence, authority, or truth. They try to veil it, but we all know that this is not all truth. Uh, we cannot neglect that their view of reality is quite frequently determined by their ideological beliefs, and they may be sometimes misplaced. The notion of representation, as understood, is usually understood as the creation of a mental space stimulated by a text, and this advocates in favor of incorporating a cognitive dimension within the study of political discourse in order to understand these representations about certain ideological beliefs. We need to get into, or we need to involve the cognitive domain into political discourse analysis also. As argued by Hart, it is by studying how discourse is cognitively processed that we may understand the effects or ideological or perspectivized views, language, or facts it may have on its users. We can actually get into some valuable evaluations of reality. So, it's not possible, according to Hart, that we can judge or know the ideological or perspectivized effects of language or political language on human beings without knowing the cognitive process of the discourse being used. This is in fact what should be done in serious interpretation stage of the analysis. Generally speaking, it's somewhere in the middle of our overall analysis of the study. The notions, two notions are important to explain representation. First, we should need to look into the perspective and its ideological implications. They are vital to understand that what kind of stance a certain political speaker is taking, and it is logical consequence of bringing the viewer's body into particular alignments with elements in the scene depicted and prior universal embodied experience. This is like similar to uh, get a listener into to be associated with the experiences of the speaker, and this is how we see that what kind of ideological implication this could believe. A listener would align with the ideological beliefs of the speaker only when he shares his experience, maybe metaphorically he shares his experience to some extent, or they both have some shared perceptions of reality. Other important element in this regard is the context. Context can be defined as a construct of socio-cultural conventions from which the online pragmatic processing of language takes its bearing. So, yes, a context can be seen on four levels, and this might help us in understanding the overall representations a certain speech, political discourse may create within us, and therefore the kind of representation it might made within our minds. Uh, as far as levels of context are concerned, we have co-textual context, in that means The a kind of context which is verbal or which is more textual. I mean, what is written before or after a certain word we are trying to analyze, that is its context. We have intertextual, the relationship between various discourses and discursive practices in the same field. Maybe they belong to the past, and how that interconnection between various texts help us to reach certain pragmatic or analytical meanings. Then context of the situation in which a certain discourse is being generated, and then the broader socio-cultural context in which the overall discourse is happening. So ideological working of discourse would probably rely heavily on the broader socio-cultural context also, because ideology is not something which is woven into a very limited space. Rather, it is created with some kind of shadiness of some external objects or some external human beings also. All of them have a bearing on the discourse is processed, on how discourse is processed, as they belong to what is known as the speaker's common ground. And the context create the common ground between speaker and the listener. And the more sharing speaker and listener have as far as their background knowledge is concerned or background context is concerned, the more useful meanings or ideologies would be exchanged. And different types of knowledge may influence the constructed mental representations in this regard. For example, personal, interpersonal, group, institutional, national, or cultural knowledge, they all can contribute to certain representations or targeted representations in the minds of our listeners or the listeners of political discourse. At the basis of this is lexical representation, as mental models lie at the core of lexical selection. So, the kind of words we choose for a certain idea to be shared shows some kind of representation in our minds. Lexical item serves both for cohesion at the level of core text. It connects idea with what is written before and after, and it also helps us creating coherence at the wider context relating to the other ideas in the overall text or in the context. Therefore, it may lead to a common underlying metaphorical schema of the discourse, which is very important to understand representation. So, in a nutshell, we might say that political discourses are loaded with ideological perspectives, various beliefs, a kind of power struggles. And in order to see these wars on ideology or about ideology or between ideology, we need to understand various representations these discourses make on the minds of people listening to such discourses or using such discourses. Overall, we can say political discourses emphasize or de-emphasize political attitudes and opinions. They garner support, manipulate public opinion, manufacture political consent, and or legitimate political power. And for that, ideology may be a major tool. So, we need to see what kind of ideological beliefs are being played with or playing with in a certain political discourse.